there. This is Pam Perry's Picks today. So we're going to be talking with Dr. Rita Fierro. And I love books. Ready, Set, Go, Speak is a program that really gets you ready, set to go and speak. And primarily today, we're going to be talking about books. Okay, we're going to be talking about digging up the seeds of white supremacy. So let me just give you a little bit about who's going to be joining us all the way from Italy. For 20 years, Dr. Rita Fierro has guided the unpicking of patterns of systemic inequities. Dr. Rita has a consulting firm that evaluates projects, researches social inequities, and provides processes that illuminate the complexity of businesses, foundations, nonprofits, NGOs, and United Nations on 4 continents. Dr. Rita facilitates conversations below the surface while honoring deep human longings, sitting face to face with personal pain of hundreds of people. Dr. Rita has a PhD in African American Studies from Temple University, and has a master's in sociology from University of Rome, Italy. And she is also the co-founder of Home for Good Coalition as to transform systemic racism in our country. So with that, I'm going to bring up Dr. Rita. Yay! Hey there!
I love the applause, Dr. Pam. Thank you.
Well,
It's
this
great
is
to
Pam
be here.
Perry's.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. Well, you know what? It's great to have you because I know you're over in Italy right now, right? So this is like a bit of a time zone difference. So I'm just excited to have you talk about this book. Oh my God, look at this book. This is like the serious book that really in United States especially has been like seems like a rise of white supremacy. And so this book is right on time. It just came out this year. And you have been studying systemic racism for 30 years. There's one in particular picture that I want to show. Hopefully, maybe people can see this. But this particular picture was the one that ran with the press release. And this is the one that talks about the roots and then what goes out from the side. And so if you can see this particular tree, I'm trying to put it right here. If you can explain that, because that was something that really kind of synopsizes the whole part of what we're really talking about today.
So this book started because I went on a journey of, I know as an organizational development consultant that the intention by which systems are founded or organizations are founded outlive their founders. Like that first intention, that first want is so powerful that it has the relationship to an organization as the seed to the tree or the seed to the fruit. And so I wanted to look back after the death of George Floyd to actually look back at all of our systems and why, despite all our efforts to change systemic racism, we had not succeeded. So I wanted to see what's the seed of all the systems and systemic racism in our country. And so what I did was look at what I found out is that fear is actually the core seed to all of our systems.
Yes.
And I mapped out 500 years of history across 10 systems in this book, and found that fear is the center, and it was embedded in our systems in a way that makes us believe it is unchangeable, but it isn't. Because a group of people came together to create the system, a group of people can change it.
So what is the fear of? What are they afraid of? What is a person afraid of? What is the fear, the basis of? Is it a fear of being taken over, fear of being extinct? White supremacists is like, you know, at the worst core, you know, obviously we think about the Nazis. Their fear was like, oh, they're going to take over the world. They're going to take over. So what is the fear? What is the fear?
The bottom line, Dr. Pam, is that Europeans who came to what then became the United States, that came to the Americas, were already traumatized themselves and in a state of desperation and fear themselves. So Columbus was in a tremendous state of family debt. He had just taken on all his dad's properties because his dad was about to be the banks were out for his dad's properties, basically. And the journey to America was his last attempt at trying to preserve the family properties and making some money of his own, basically. So he was in a state where he was at the courts of Spain, pretending to be, being this very as we depict him, courageous man with big dreams, but also like champagne taste and beer pocket, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
So he's
Mm-hmm.
at the courts and he's extremely poor. The banks are at his neck, at his family's neck. So when he came to the Americas, although the indigenous people welcomed him in the best of ways and gave him and his crew access to sweet water, because without the indigenous people telling them where the rivers were, they would have died of thirst. They only knew the salt water that was in the ocean.
Wow.
They protected his cargo when one of the ships was destroyed against the rocks. Indigenous people were the one who led him up and down the coast.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does this traumatized individual turn around and do? In a state of desperation, because he hasn't found the gold that he promised to all his investors, he turns around and he says, I'm going to enslave 20 natives and bring them back to me in Spain and prove to the Queen of Spain that this is a docile people that can be easily subdued. And that way I can get more money to come back and find the gold.
So then the fear seems like, and this is what I always just say, the fear was really the motive of money. It's like,
Yes.
basically the slave trade with African Americans, the Africans was about money, and it was the fear. And it's really it's a basic, like, I'm going to greed. I guess it's fear and greed. I mean, those are,
Yes.
we kind of talk about the sins in the Bible, lust, greed.
Yeah.
It's like all of those type of the sins in the Bible, right? It talks about those are the things that trap people up. And so this right here, you have something below fear is savior. So explain
Yeah.
that part right there, because we always hear, and I used to work for the Salvation Army, just really, really quick. And one of the things that a lot of Black people would say, even though the Salvation Army did really, really great work, and they did in the name of missions, in the name of salvation for their souls, but they felt like they were the great Messiah. And so you would kind of hear that kind of the term all the time, like, okay, you want to help us, but you're doing it from the standpoint that you feel like you have to save us. So explain that part of it
Yes,
as well.
absolutely. So, just to finish a last thought on what we were saying before, the reason why Columbus is so important is because he sets a precedent,
Mm,
right? So he sets a precedent that others follow. So all the other conquistadores and other Spaniards and Dutch and English that come follow his track. That's why what he did was so important, because he created a precedent where it was okay to occupy, to steal, and to dominate. And that core fear is basically a minority group, a small group of people trying to dominate a majority,
mhm,
basically,
mhm.
right? So that's the core fear. And then
Oh,
it shows up, to your question now, it shows up in 3 different ways, which I argue is safety, control, and saviorism.
mm,
So I'm going to take a step back and then get to savior. So safety is the illusion that for me to be safe, I have to protect myself against you. Control is the illusion that, and I don't see you anymore, Pam. Are you still there? Control, I'll continue because it sounds like the live is still going. Okay. Control is the illusion that in order for my needs to be met, I have to control yours or control you. And saviorism is basically after you've been removed, I've removed all the rights that were most important to you. There you are, you're back. So I'll wrap it up quickly, since I lost you for a second. So safety is the illusion that in order for me to be safe, I have to protect myself against you, right?
mm,
And that was all the European beliefs about indigenous people being savages and then being unsafe because they had come from torturous and war, and so they walked into the Americas assuming that they were in a state of unsafety. Control is the assumption that in order for my needs to be met, I have to control you and control yours. And
mhm,
this is the assumption underneath all of American institutions, that
mhm.
our needs can't be met together, but in order for the needs of whites to be met, the needs of people of color have to be forsaken.
Wow.
And then saviorism becomes the way that we as whites kind of make up for it, because then after we have removed the land, the property, the children, and after we've removed all basic rights from folks of color, then we want to feel good about ourselves. So we try to prove our value by then trying to save those that we consider less fortunate, when actually we have a responsibility over having removed the best of them to begin with.
That
And
is,
so saviorism is also based in superiority.
it is. It really is. It,
It is.
when someone says, "Oh, I'm going to be your," they call it the Messiah complex, right? It's like I'm going to save you, but it's saving you after you have just really just like toppled everything about our culture. And then, like you said, to make you feel better. So all of this has to do with feelings, because you kind of talk a little bit. So at the point of where this one right here, you talk about health, safety, legal, criminal justice, economic, uh, juvenile, this whole part right here, and it's like in different colors. So you have the green, the brown, and the yellow. Was
Yep.
there a explaining that part right there is really,
Yeah.
really important. So
So
explain
from
that
the
part.
seed of safety
Okay.
are born the health systems and the legal system.
Ah, okay.
From the
Safety. Okay.
seed of, and actually I love that you're giving us the simplified tree, but this is actually the one that's on the front and the back
Oh,
that
good.
gives you like all the detail,
Yes,
right?
yes, that's the one.
And basically this is the structure of the book, so it's a little overwhelming when you see it at once, and then after you read the book it comes alive. So
Right, right.
from the seed of safety were born the systems of health and the legal system. And then from the seat of control were born the economic and the criminal justice system,
Mhm,
which from the beginning are the first that form, and they're formed in a bond to
mhm,
the point of like um, Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. There is a bond between the economic and the legal system in the Americas, and the first system to form, and they're formed together. And then again, with the seat of control is the education and the immigration system. And then from the saviorism seed are born the juvenile justice, the mental health, the welfare, and the child welfare system.
I knew for sure the welfare, but explain about the mental health. Why is that? What part is that? Explain that part, because I kind of I know that part about the the child welfare and all of that, but explain the other part.
The first kind of ancestor of all these systems are almshouses. And in the European, basically, Europeans would lock up the poor, the elderly, the mental health, the folks with mental health disorders, all in almshouses. So in the beginning, there were these big institutions that were basically hiding away people who, in European traditions, were considered shameful,
Ah,
because mental health and poverty and and deviance was seen as God's punishment or proof of a punishment from God. The original idea was that you had sinned, therefore God has sent it to a punishment. And so the whole family felt a sense of shame around there being a person with a mental health or poverty or so on and so forth.
mm,
And then as the almshouses get reformed, these four groups of people sort of get separated, and they become four different systems. But what's really interesting about this is that there's a shame around being poor and a judgment of the poor that
mhm.
is baked into the United States systems. So when we adopted in 1601 the
Welfare.
poverty laws,
Yeah,
the
the
poverty
welfare.
laws of England, we did it without a clause that the English had, which is that the community was responsible for serving the poor in their own homes. And it's not until the mid 1900s that we actually consider taking that on. The assumption was if you were in America, there was plenty of land to take, of course,
Hmm.
which was actually stealing.
Right.
And so, because there was plenty of land to take, if you were poor in America, it would have been only because you were lazy. Therefore, the community never felt a sense of responsibility for the poor. And
Mm.
that's how we end up with the systems that we have.
Wow. I love how you explain things and have studied it. So the book is really broken up into part one, the self system cycle, and then part two, the needs, seeds, and the systems. And then part three, you go into like the years, right? White supremacy seeds to maturity, like 1492, we talked about Columbus, to 1876. And then we go into part four, which is really 1876 to like 1948, which talks about root stocking white supremacy. And then the saviorism systems, that that part right there, part 5. And then 6, pruning white supremacy. So that part I kind of want to go into a little bit because I was alive during that time. So that's during the 1960s and the 1980s, pruning white supremacy. And then we'll kind of talk about, because right now we're at the part right now about fertilizing white supremacy, which is like the 2020. And then really we talk about the two Americas. So really let's talk about pruning the white supremacy between 1960s and 1980s. Even though I was
Yeah.
born, I'd like to hear it from your the study, the academic way that you would explain it. This is so enlightening. The book.
Yeah, and of course, you having lived it, and of course, you having lived it, I'm open to how what I share resonates or doesn't resonate with you. Uh, so when I love, again, the analogy of the tree came together as a way to, like, and with images, which is why they're graphic recordings, to give us an opportunity to accommodate for more complexity. Because thinking about 500 years of history and 10 systems can be quite overwhelming.
Yes.
But the analogy of the tree, which started out as just kind of a way to allow the book to have a structure that would hold it together, became extremely insightful for me. Because if you think about what does it take to eradicate a tree, right? Like, what does it take to actually kill a tree? So if a tree is living for 550 years, some residents of DC or Maryland know what it takes. It takes a lot to uproot one. There was a tree recently, I think it was in DC, that was had to be cut down, and it was a whole month process because the roots are deep, the branches are broad, the trunk is humongous, all the houses around it have settled around it. So the point here is that white supremacy as a system has survived 550 years because we've been nourishing it. And it's been nourished at the soil. So while we think about white supremacy as something of the neo-Nazis or the KKK or whatever the new version of it is, which I won't name to not give them any free publicity, there's something in our culture that nurtures the soil of this tree. And when we decide, as we did in the 60s and 80s, that we could see the system, we could see the injustices, and we were adamant about building a movement to change it, what we did, I would argue, is that we went at the system one branch at a time. And so what the tree analogy allows us to look into is that when we cut the branches of a tree one branch at a time, it doesn't actually weaken the tree, it strengthens it.
It's pruning it.
That's what pruning is, yes. So those who are farmers or have practices know there is a way to prune a tree. Not all prune trees get reinforced. There's an art to it. But overall, to strengthen a tree, you cut it back. And so you make it smaller one year in the expectation that it will fruit back to you double in 2 years. And I argue that in the 60s, in the movement of the civil rights movement, from actually 1948, which is the beginning of the desegregation of the armed forces, up to 1968, the final Housing Rights Act, what we did was prune the tree. Why am I saying that? One, because we passed legislation that allowed us to hold people in government offices accountable for discriminating. But we can only hold accountable the same office and the same person for discriminating. And so the way the systems backlashed is they created separate government systems and separate offices for handling the poor and the middle class and the rich. And people of color are almost always trapped in the ones for the poor. Right? Which is why you have, professors of universities getting held up by cops when they're knocking on their own doors, or, all the ways in which we know that Black folk, in particular Black folk, but people of color get trapped into the policing systems. And so what I think we did in the 60s, not willingly, but what I think we did with the civil rights movement is that we stopped monitoring, and I'm speaking particularly about white liberals here, right? So there was this push towards justice.
Yeah, yeah,
And
they
then
were
we
marching with
betrayed
us.
the movement
Mhm.
by saying, okay, there are a couple of black folk in the restaurant around the corner. There are black folk are at the diner. Black folk are here. We're going to school together. We're
There's
sort of kind of
immigration.
neighbors. It's
Mhm,
enough.
mhm, mhm.
And what we didn't monitor was the way in which the system was adapting and backlashing. So that actually the separation between white wealth and black wealth today is actually wider than it was before the civil rights movement.
Wow.
Because basically the systems backlashed, which is what systems do. They reinforce the old result. So what I'm saying is that, well, maybe we cut it back in the short run. Maybe we reduced, of course, legal segregation. That was a huge victory. We reduced legal discrimination. That was a huge victory. But
Mhm.
if we are to look at the results, quality of life, health, poverty, incarceration rates, I don't think we're that better off. And so I'm saying we actually cut back the beast and then it came back stronger, just the way a tree cut back yields more fruit 2 years later.
So that was like the 60s, and then 2020 was really when the full beast, where it became so, I guess you would say, fed politically as well, but it became the era of Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, all of that.
Yes.
Ahmaud Arbery. I mean, that had to
Yes.
be the most. I mean, I'm
Sandra
sure
Bland.
yeah, it
Yeah.
probably happened before. I mean, Emmett Till, obviously, we did not have cell phones during that time, but that
Yeah.
was like my generation's Emmett Till, like just like seeing someone just literally shoot someone on camera, right? But I'm sure if you go down south and you see the whole thing about the lynchings and all of that, it just we just never caught it.
Yeah.
So we have these, people also think that, oh, we have a black president, we got Michelle and Barack Obama in the White House. And what does that do? That really strengthens that system, because we're pruning back, but we're not really getting to the root. So the book talks about getting up the root, like digging up the seeds, which, you know, like you said, from Christopher Columbus all the way up until now, we're talking like, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years. So what is the solution that your organization does that, and that's what you do. So what is really like the 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 cure, I guess you would say, or in the
Yeah.
simple term, like the cure, because it's unity is what we're striving for. So what
Yes.
do you see?
So the first thing is we need to see the roots and we need to recognize the roots
Hmm.
because the system has trained us to not see it. And the system has trained us to believe it's unchangeable, it is necessary, and that we don't have the power to change it because it's so big and it's so powerful that we can't change it.
Yeah,
Again, a group of
that's
people
not
put
true.
together a system, a group of people can change it. It
Thank
will take a movement.
you. Yeah.
It will take a movement. Individual people can't do it because the system is also designed to burn out individual people. But
Hmm.
it is possible. And times of crises, like the one we're in right now,
People.
are extremely, yes, people tend to come together because
Mhm.
so many people are feeling the impact of the crisis, and systems are not designed to deal with crises. They're designed to just preserve the old.
You're
So,
so right. I didn't
yeah,
basically, yes. Okay, I
yeah.
get that. Yes.
So if we think about the fact that, there's all this complaining of like, oh, no one wants to work at McDonald's. Yeah, because people who are used to living on $9 an hour and pay childcare with basically with unemployment, they can live 2 years because poor people are not all these huge spenders like we depict them in the media. They're actually incredible budgeters. So they
Mhm.
probably spent 2 years living on what was given them in 1 year. And in that second year, they're like, I want to go for my dream. I want to go back to school. I want to get out of the dead end job, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
the system, though, is designed for people to stay the same, keep their dreams small, and be controllable,
Control.
right?
That same thing,
Yes.
that control.
Yes.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yes. So the first thing is to actually see it. And I argue that the roots of the tree, the roots of the system of white supremacy are the illusion of superiority, the illusion of scarcity, the illusion of separation, and this blindness. The blindness is that we don't actually see the system and don't believe we can change it. The other three
And this part, Dr.
are,
Rita, I'll just hold it. That
go for
part
it.
reminds me of someone who is going through AA, right? So in order to uh, overcome alcoholism, you first have to recognize it, right? That's like the main thing. You first got to recognize
Yes.
it. So in order to
Yes.
solve it, you got to recognize that there is a problem. And this right here, really, when you just even talked about the fear at the very beginning, how it originated and how it just really just was, when how the country was just started, the United States was just started, that fear was just always there. And they feel like you had to dominate people, dominate um, the people that were already here, dominate Africa. I mean, just that part right there, just recognizing like, okay, this is the birth, this is the seed of it. Okay, so now we recognize it, and then where do we go
Yeah.
next?
The other piece is to recognize that the system is one and that all systems are connected. Our education systems and academia have an interest in having us focus on one system at a time because the whole system will never be uprooted one branch at a time. So
Mm,
I think it's important to see the system as a whole. And I didn't make this up. I've had lots of African American scholars and mentors who have mentored me over the years. And to a great extent, African Americans have the experience of the system as well.
mhm,
Because when you have those bad days and you try to go to the doctor and everything goes wrong, and then you try to get something out of the bank and everything goes wrong, and then you go to work and it's just, there is an experience that African Americans already have of the system as one. I'm
mhm,
just kind of giving it flesh with some historical facts and analysis here. So
mhm.
we need to see the system as one, and we have to create strategy for uprooting it as one, dismantling it as one.
Dismantling.
Um, and then the other piece is that I go by in regenerative practice, there's an important theory called 3 lines of work. We often want to think of systems as we can change them by just protesting or going at it or changing a policy. I would argue that policy change creates backlash and generally changes back.
Mm,
And
okay.
instead, what really can change is the culture. Like the culture is the soil of the tree. If the chemistry of the soil changes, the tree will just die.
Ah,
And so, how does that happen? First, but by us going to the gym against fear and basically exercising the muscles of learning to not choose fear in our decision making, even our most intimate decision making, but choosing what we're really committed to, whether that's love or connection or community,
or
but
you.
being willing to really stand for what we stand for and not operate from a state of constant fear.
Mhm, mhm. That is really like the hardest part for people to choose that, to choose unity, community over fear, right? Because it's a mindset, which
Yes.
basically, because if not, you're just really like you said, you're just pruning the tree. You're not getting to the root. Okay,
Yes.
I love.
And the systems around us reinforce fear, right? Like get a lawyer, they're about to hurt you, right? This all our systems reinforce fear. So it really takes diligence, support, way showers, elders teaching us how to live beyond fear.
Mm-hmm.
And once we do that in the 3 lines of work, then our relationships transform. We transform and change. Then our relationships transform and change. So the movements that we build and the groups that we build and the organizations that we found and the businesses that we create then also have an opportunity to live beyond fear. And we learn what it's like to live beyond fear as a collectives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then when we have enough collectives that are living beyond fear, then the system will just have to shift because seeing injustice will no longer be acceptable when we're in a place of genuine love and connection with one another.
That was the word I was looking for. Genuine love and connection, right? That is like the main thing. Genuine love and connection, and not of the fear. And not of quote unquote saviorism, that part, and really not just policy and not just protests, but actually like the actually getting in there and getting our hands dirty, like digging up the root, like what is the cause of that. Just real quick, the last question. So I want people.
1 second, I have to add one little thing.
Okay, okay.
That there's also this bigger piece about monitor. I've talked about how the 60s we let loose because we stopped monitoring how the system changes. Any action to shift the system will create some adaptation. So Home for Good Coalition, which is a grassroots organization that I co-founded, we've created a model to bring people who have been doing activism and systems change work in all those 10 branches in the same room so we can leverage our collective intelligence to shift the whole. We have to monitor how the whole shifts when we change bits and pieces. Like, we have to do this in an extremely strategic, smart way. And we also have to be building community and be the alternative to the society we want to see while we're doing it.
And you said the word collective. That's the name of your podcast.
Collective power. Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
So it's also
Yes.
too in Amazon as well. So I don't know if you knew that or not, but people can
Oh, I
listen to
didn't know, actually.
yeah, people can listen to it in Amazon. So it's, Amazon basically kind of like owns the world, right? So they have Audible, and so you can listen to your Collective Power podcast there as well. But I also put down the fact that people can actually click it and get the book, Digging Up the Seeds of White Supremacy, right here in Amazon, or go to Dr. Rita Writes as well, because it is one of those things. I'll read what someone said on the back of the book. It says, this book needs to be read by every American. As a Black man living in America, this work was psychologically healing in a way that cannot be explained but must be experienced. And that was by Andre Alexander, Grammy winner, professor at USC. And it says it can't just be explained, it must be experienced. And it's like, it's one of those things where you talk about the mindset. It really is the mindset of people just really wanting to do that. And I think the time is now. I'm so glad that you wrote this book in the time that you did. You probably wanted to write it 20 years ago, probably wanted to write it 10 years ago. You know what I'm saying? But
I
like,
did.
it was like, okay, this is the time. This is
Yes.
the time. It is so well needed. And then also too, one of the professors from Temple University says, digging up the seeds is that rare original work based on years of study and experience that will change forever the way we see anti-racism, which is a term that is so trendy right now, right? It's right up there with Kendi's How to Be an Racist, and Harrison's and D'Angelo's Do the Right Thing for Courage, Passion, and Compassion. Dr. Rita's powerful work is compelling as a memoir and towering as an anti-racism manual. It will be a valuable book for all serious workers against cultural and social injustice. So one part of the book we didn't talk about in the interview, but you'll talk about in the book, is about the memoir, about your personal healing journey as well.
Yeah.
Which is,
and I'm hoping, I'm hoping that by sharing, because I say about this book, it wrote itself in a year and it's been teaching me how to live by it ever since. So I'm hoping that with some of my personal story and how I see these seeds of white supremacy in me, how the saviorism seed got planted and how the fear and the control, like how these show up in me and how I work to undo them internally and not choose them, because I think it's a moment by moment practice. I'm hoping that by doing that, the reader also has a pathway. So I really am like, I don't want people to walk away feeling hopeless. Another hopeless book about how freaking unjust our world is. I want the reader, and to what I hear, I succeeded, the reader to really walk away with a sense of hope and power about, okay, this is something I can do. And my personal journey allows for a little bit of that.
Yeah, and that's the part that I really wanted you to talk about, that you give in the book in detail, and on your podcast too, and also you write on your blog and all of that kind of thing. So your content is out there, and I want people to reach out to you because people may want to bring you in to speak. I mean, just the little tidbit that we have right now is just so empowering and refreshing. Very refreshing. Like I told you, you were on an interview the other day, and National Black Book Festival, Gwen says, "Oh, I'm so sorry that we only have a half an hour. We could talk to you all day," because it is one of those things. Even though you've been studying this for a long, long time, other people are just hearing what you know, and I just really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Pam. This was lovely, and I love everything that you stand for and the heart and the spirit with which you do it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
It's an honor.
Oh, this is good. This is good. Well, we are